Welcome, everybody. We are recording this session, as you probably heard an announcement. Welcome to the third and final session of today's event. You and the 34%, how to have meaningful conversations with high potential voters. My name is Myra Levy. I'm a volunteer with Swing Left San Francisco. And my fellow volunteer, Sam Chavez, and I will be working behind the scenes to help this training look seamless for you. So why are we here? Because in 2020, 34% of eligible voters—
We're not going to get much, just like it's—
Hang on. So if you're not muted, please mute yourself for a minute. In 2020, 34% of eligible voters in the US did not vote. What would it take to change that and build power for a progressive agenda? To address that question, Elizabeth Chur and Dr. Jackie Tulski have joined forces to create this training. Our starting point is that nobody is born knowing how to talk with voters, but it's a skill that we can learn and get better at. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our trainers, Jackie and Elizabeth. Dr. Jackie Tulski is an HIV primary care and addiction medicine specialist at San Francisco General Hospital, and she's also a trainer in motivational interviewing. Elizabeth Chur is an experienced phone banker and canvasser who trained hundreds of volunteers in 2020. Her workshops have included phone bank training for introverts and Spanish for phone banking. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Great. Thanks so much, Myra. And thank you all for hanging in there. Wow, I have to say, Bonnie and David, you guys are tough acts to follow. And we are so privileged to be in your company today. Thank you so much for those amazing presentations. I learned so much. And I'm hoping that some of what we share in our portion will kind of dovetail with the amazing kind of a framework that you have laid out. I also want to thank everybody who's hugging here, going on hour 3 of Zoom. You are absolute heroes of democracy. So Jackie and I are totally thrilled to be here with you today. And just want to kick this off by asking if you could raise your physical hand if you have ever talked to a voter who says, I'm not voting. Anybody ever hear that? Some variation of that? My vote doesn't count. Yes, you are in the right room. And we hope by the end of this conversation that you will have gleaned a few tips for how that could be the beginning rather than the end of a conversation. So just a quick few housekeeping items. As Myra mentioned, if you could please keep yourself muted most of the time. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will answer them at the end of the training. We are also recording this session and we will share a link to the slides at the end of today's training and invite you to complete a survey. This is a work in progress and we would be grateful for your feedback. So just a quick overview, we'll start with some context about the importance of high potential voters, share a few stories. We've heard so much about the importance of stories already today. And then we'll provide a few suggestions for how to connect with this very important group. We'll demonstrate a few interactions and afterwards we hope some of you can stick around for an optional Q&A. We hope that you'll learn some concrete new skills for navigating challenging conversations and come away with some new tools that will help make phone banking and canvassing less stressful, more effective, and more satisfying. Some of what we share today may be very different than approaches you've used in the past, and we have a lot of respect for traditional organizing strategies. But for some conversations, particularly with people who rarely or never vote, it can be useful to have some additional tools. And many of these have been touched on already by David and Bonnie, but we hope to sort of just add a little bit extra to that conversation as well. And also, we don't expect folks to use everything that we try out today. And if you come away with maybe 1 or 2 new ideas, that would be a huge success. Finally, we do recognize the irony of talking at you for an hour in a training that promotes the importance of deep listening. This is actually the appetizer version of an interactive 2-hour training. So if you find this approach helpful, we invite you to join us for our next full-length training on Saturday, April 30th, where you will have a chance to talk and practice these skills in small groups. And we're dropping a link in the chat to sign up. So just to start off, I'd like you to imagine what might be possible if we elected Democratic supermajorities at the local, state, and federal levels. What if Democrats not only had the White House, but let's say 80% of the Senate and US House seats? What if our state legislatures were controlled by Democrats and mayors, school boards, and other local offices were also held by Democrats? What could we do together? Take a moment to dream big. And then we invite you to put a few words in the chat describing what would be possible if this dream came true. For example, I would want universal health care. Yes, Jackie says voter protection laws. Better environment, Frank. Sam, climate crisis mitigation. Colleen, I would feel safer. Moses, eliminate super PACs. Mary, really address climate change. Susan, I'd want to improve and better funding of the ACA. Susan, gun safety laws. Rochelle, address climate change. Yes. Yes. Jean, money out of elections. Nicholas, no Citizens United. I second that motion. Jerry, I want to attend to climate change. Joan, voter laws, climate change, women's right to choose. All of the above. Solar power, not fuel. Wow, this is fantastic. Does a supermajority of progressives mean that we do not reach out across the aisle? I think we'll talk about that a little bit later in trading, but yes, end of the filibuster, Meg, yes. All right. Wow, this is totally inspiring, and thank you everybody. Wow, for all of these ERA, yes. I just invite you to keep these great possibilities in the back of your mind as we go through this training today, and also as you do the hard work of reaching out to voters in the future. So now we'd just like to give you a bit of context. We all know how close the 2020 elections were. Less than 43,000 voters in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin decided the outcome of the Electoral College. And I'll give you just a moment to look at this amazing slide. I know there's a lot going on here, but basically it shows the popular vote in the 3 most recent elections when you include all eligible voters. The number of eligible voters is determined by census data. It includes citizens age 18 or older who aren't barred from voting because of past felony convictions, depending on the laws in their state. The Democrats in blue and the Republicans in red are pretty close in 2016, 2018, and 2020. The purple band represents third-party voters, which includes some of these elusive swing voters that we hear so much about. But perhaps our greatest opportunity for impacting the election are the voters represented in green, eligible voters who did not vote. In 2020, a year when we saw the highest turnout in over a century, 34% of the electorate still did not cast a ballot. Many in that group were young people, people of color, and lower income voters, people who may be inclined to support progressive priorities. Of course, some of these people had their votes suppressed. Others just need help navigating logistics, like confirming their polling location or how to request an absentee ballot. But there is some portion of this 34% that flat out is not interested in voting or only votes occasionally. Midterm elections historically have lower turnout. As you can see, in 2018, 52% of eligible voters didn't vote. That's something to keep in mind in this year's midterm elections. People who rarely or never vote are often labeled low propensity voters, but I like a term used by Anat Shenko-Osorio, a Democratic communications strategist. She calls them high potential voters. It focuses on their strength and their power. If we could encourage even a fraction of these high potential voters to get out and vote, it could have a big impact. So engaging with voters isn't a one-size-fits-all process. Instead, I try to tailor my approach based on how the conversation unfolds. Here, the voter is in blue and my responses are in green. If they're a strong or likely Democrat, The traditional approach of mentioning a few of the candidates' talking points and making a plan to vote probably works great. This is essential to any campaign and helps to ensure that our strongest supporters have all the information they need to vote. If I encounter someone who would never vote for a Democrat or happens to be rude, I don't try to change their mind. I politely say, have a great day, and end the conversation. But at least once each shift, I talk to someone who tells me, oh, I'm not voting. Bingo, I have just connected with a member of the 34%. But how should I respond? There are 3 pathways. The first is just to thank them and to hang up. Some phone bank and canvassing scripts actually say to do this, but this is a lost opportunity. The second is to preach at them, recite all the talking points and tell them all the reasons why this election is so crucial. This usually doesn't work very well. It feels bad to talk at people, and it feels really bad to be on the receiving end of that. The third path requires me to shift gears and slow down. As Bonnie emphasized, I try to get curious. Can I view the voter like an anthropologist would? Show empathy and be non-judgmental. Listen more than you talk, especially at the beginning. Ask open-ended questions, then silently count to 10 to give them a chance to respond. It's challenging, but this approach can make the conversation more effective and satisfying for the voter and for you. Let me tell you about one of these high potential voters. In December 2020, I was calling Georgia for the Senate runoffs, and I spoke with a voter I'll call Ophelia. She was really stressed out and didn't know there was another election in January. She said, I don't have time to think about politics, and I just try to tune them out. She couldn't even remember the name of the president, but she said she didn't like him. She described how hard things were with her mother, who had lots of health issues. Although Ophelia got laid off during the pandemic and her unemployment had run out, she still helped her mom financially. This went on for about 25 minutes, and I wondered if I was wasting my time. But she really wanted to talk. I said I was so sorry to hear about her situation and that I had also had a sick parent, and I knew how hard that could be. Then Ophelia asked if I was a Democrat, and I said yes. And she said she leaned that way too, but she hadn't voted in November. I said, oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. She said, I figured Trump was going to win again, so what was the point? I said, I'm really glad Biden will be our next president, but it was a really close election, and it showed that we needed every voter. I said, it would be tragic if Biden can't get anything done because the Republicans still control the Senate. They've blocked the Democrats for years. In the latest pandemic relief bill, the Democrats wanted to include money for things like extended unemployment benefits, but the Republicans refused. If they keep control of the Senate, that will probably continue. But if the Democrats win these 2 Senate seats in Georgia next week and gain control of the Senate, we could help people who really need it during the pandemic. Something clicked for Ophelia. She said, okay, that's it. I'm going to vote. I'm going to make sure my family does too. I said, wow, that's great. Could you spread the word to 3 people you know? She said, yeah, my husband works in construction and he has 100 coworkers. Most of them didn't vote in November either, but we'll tell them that now that we have a new president, we want to make sure that he can get things done. So get out and vote on January 5th. We're Hispanic and we're going to get this going. We'll tell them get out and vote and then come to the cookout. I said, wow, Cecilia, you are really connected to the community. You and the people you know could decide the outcome of the runoffs. I asked if I could send her information about early voting and text her a reminder on election day. She said, sure. So afterwards I texted her, and this is what she wrote back. God works in mysterious ways. You made my day. Yes, I will take all my friends to the polls. I can literally imagine the poll workers' faces when we walk in. Unfortunately, I don't have a loudspeaker. I would go around town announcing it, ha ha. That's just one example of how eliciting a voter's concerns, trying to respond from the heart, and connecting what they care about with what's at stake in this election can help them draw their own conclusions about voting. One way to do this is to incorporate some tools of motivational interviewing, or MI. This approach has been around for decades in fields like psychotherapy and social work. It's been shown through hundreds of clinical trials to help people change their behavior. But you don't have to be a psychiatrist or a social worker to incorporate these approaches. In a minute, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jackie Tulsky. I met her last year through my work as a freelance medical writer. Jackie is an internist who's had decades of experience caring for patients at San Francisco General Hospital who have HIV, substance use disorders, and mental health issues. And yet, even with these huge challenges, some are inspired to make big life changes, like taking a step towards reducing their drug use or getting a COVID vaccine. She uses motivational interviewing to engage with compassion, drawing out their intrinsic desires to change and helping them align their actions with those desires. Jackie is also a motivational interviewing trainer, and we're so lucky to have her with us to share ways to apply these tools to effectively engage with voters, especially high potential voters. Jackie?
Thank you, Elizabeth. And honestly, I feel really lucky to be with you all today. And I'm so grateful for your interest in learning about using motivational interviewing in conversations with high potential voters. You've actually heard a lot about motivational interviewing in the last two presentations we had with David and Bonnie. We just didn't label it motivational interviewing. So what is motivational interviewing, or MI? It's a method of communicating which seeks to draw out somebody's own motivations to help them sort out their own ambivalence for change. Ambivalence is something most of us are really familiar with, feeling two ways about something at the same time. Like, I really want to eat healthy, but that bag of open chips over there knows my name and is calling me over. And although many people are not happy with their elected leaders, life doesn't seem to change that much no matter who's in office. So why bother voting? There's some really specific skills and tools that we can use to have MI consistent conversations. But learning MI really starts with a kind of philosophical approach to communicating. The spirit of MI has 4 principles with the acronym of PACE. And interestingly, all 4 are woven through Elizabeth's conversation with Ophelia, helping Ophelia resolve ambivalence about voting. So the first is partnering. We try to take the attitude that what the person we are talking to thinks and has to say is as important as what we have to say. We ask questions that are open, that invite the person to tell us more. We listen to what they are ambivalent about and what they wish would change and why. We learned that Ophelia had too much to do and felt that so much was out of her control. But she really didn't like Trump, and there were things that were really important to her, like taking care of her mother. With autonomy, we honor a person's control of their own decisions. We recognize and respect the right not to change. Maybe Ophelia will vote her interests, and maybe she won't. When we acknowledge and accept another person's autonomy, they have space to move forward rather than feeling backed into a corner defending their initial position. Compassion is the third principle, and we have empathy for how hard it is to change ourselves or the world. We express genuine curiosity about what motivates a person's actions and what might help them do something different. When Elizabeth listened to Ophelia's troubles and says, "I know what it's like to care for a family member," she shows compassion for how hard it is to be human. Now, that sharing is not meant to shift the focus away from Ophelia, but simply to acknowledge that it would be hard to add one more thing like voting to your very busy life, and yet you managed to do so much. The final principle is evoking, and it's drawing out the person's own ambivalence and helping them explore reasons why they may want to change. Ophelia talked about her life, and Elizabeth says, tell me more about your family, your work. Evoking means asking the person what they want to change. If you elected a person that listened to you, what 3 things might you want them to know? Or if an honest person were elected, what 2 or 3 things might be different a year from now? We use PACE, the 4 principles of the Spirit MI, to support all our other MI skills. So let's look at a few MI tools and skills, starting with an OR. OAR is a reminder of 3 ways to start and keep a conversation going. And again, I want to emphasize that these principles are really embedded in what we heard so beautifully from Bonnie's talk and David's earlier. So open-ended questions can't be answered with a yes or a no, are sincerely curious and non-judgmental, and people may need time to answer. So you have to wait. Even count to 10 if no response. If they start responding, you can encourage them to keep talking without interrupting them by making sympathetic sounds or phrases like, or or wow. For example, tell me more about not voting in last November's election. There's one special type of open-ended question called the ruler, and it can be especially helpful for assessing a voter's motivation level, just the way Bonnie talked about it in her talk. For example, you can ask them, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to vote, with 0 meaning very unlikely, and 10 being, oh, pretty likely, very likely. If they say 3, then you can ask them, oh, now why isn't that number a 0 or a 1? And they may share some interesting information about why they might be interested in voting. Then you can follow up by asking, and what might boost your 3 to a 4 or a 5? And that could open the door for them sharing things that could help them take the next step toward voting. Affirmation is a way of reminding a person, in this case, the voter, that they've made changes in the past. It acknowledges previous efforts or actions that demonstrate strength, and it's based on things you've heard them mention. It can be so hard to take care of a family member, or you are really connected to the community, or you've made real efforts to vote. Reflection is repeating or even interpreting what the voter said. It helps the voter hear themselves and shows that you're really listening, but it is probably the hardest part of OR. If a voter tells you, I've voted before, but nothing changed, a simple reflection would be, you voted before. Another example is when Ophelia tells Elizabeth, oh, I figured Trump was going to win, so what was the point? Elizabeth chooses to interpret a little bit and says, the election was really close and it showed that we needed every voter. So OAR, or a very useful MI tool that can help someone talk about their frustrations, but also their priorities. I'm going to give it back to Elizabeth to tell us a little bit more about OR.
Thanks so much, Jackie. So I just wanted to note a few things about OR and how to use these elements strategically. First, we're not saying that all closed-ended questions are bad. They're definitely super helpful in some situations, like asking, have you received your ballot yet? And while we encourage you to strategically pause and count to 10 after asking open-ended questions or sharing a reflection, sometimes pausing is less useful, like when you're first introducing yourself. With practice, you'll gain a sense of which elements of OR can be most useful at which point. Also, I just want to emphasize that these techniques are not foolproof. We don't want you to think that if you do them perfectly, no one will ever hang up on you or shut the door in your face. Honestly, with some voters, I could be Gandhi or Stacey Abrams asking the most thoughtful, open-ended question, and they would still hang up. Instead, maybe these approaches will help an extra 5 to 10% of voters stay engaged with you, and that can make all the difference in close elections. Great. So in a moment, we'll show an example of how to use open-ended questions, affirmations, and reflections in a real conversation. But since I'm on the topic of getting hung up on, first, I'd like to say a few words about getting past hello. And I know some folks also had asked questions about this earlier in the chat. So the first minute of a conversation is crucial. It's when they're most likely to hang up or close the door. The most important thing is to try to establish a respectful connection right from the get-go and to keep the conversation going. I like to think of this as one of those fairy tales where the hero or heroine has to get across the moat before they can enter the castle. Jackie and I will demonstrate the first couple minutes of a conversation. Listen carefully for the ways the volunteer tries to build rapport right from the start. Also, note any open-ended questions and reflections that you hear the volunteer use. We invite you to put these into the chat. For example, you could put open. If you could change anything about the country, what would it be? Or reflect. You wonder if one vote makes a difference. So now I'll call the voter, Jackie, in support of Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona, who, as you know, is running for re-election this November in a very tight race. Ring, ring.
Hello?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. May I speak with Jackie Tolsky, please?
Yeah, that's me. What's this about?
Oh, I appreciate you taking my call. I'm a volunteer with the Arizona Democrats calling in support of Senator Mark Kelly. I'm not calling to ask for money. We're just trying to find out
You know
what you think.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm busy and I hate getting these kinds of calls.
Oh, I hear you. I actually don't really like making these calls either. And at the same time, the upcoming election for US Senate feels really important. It would be so valuable if you could just give me a minute to share some of your thoughts about where things are headed in the US.
Well, I don't vote.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
You know, it's just a waste of time. All those campaign promises and then nothing changes. I'm so tired of it. I've got enough to do without that. I mean, I voted in the past, but my life sure didn't get any better.
You voted when you thought it would impact you.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I thought it would make a difference, but then nothing happened. I mean, look at how things are now. COVID's still here. It took forever to get the kids back in school. And then my husband lost his job and we didn't have health insurance for almost 6 months. I mean, I don't have time to pay attention to who's running for local dog catcher or whatever.
You're a really strong person who's juggling a lot. I'm wondering if you had a chance to actually talk to Senator Mark Kelly, what 2 or 3 things would you want him to put at the top of his to-do list?
Oh, I have no idea. You know, I really don't know.
Well, I'm wondering if you could change 2 or 3 things about Arizona, what would they be?
2 or 3 things. You know, well, my husband and I both work full time and we can barely make ends meet. I got laid off from my job as a bank teller during the pandemic, and now I'm delivering for Uber Eats. And gas prices just keep going up, but my wages sure don't. I mean, I end up spending the first 2 hours wages just on gas.
Wow. All right, time out. So we're going to just take a look at the chat. Thank you for dropping some things in there and just see what some of you heard. Let's see, I see that Myra said open-ended question, tell me more about that. Rochelle, reflection, you voted when you thought, when it was important to you. Reflection, you're juggling a lot.
I see there's an open-ended, like if you had a chance to talk, which could totally open up a bunch of comments from somebody. Let's see if I see any others. Again, that wondering if you could change 2 or 3 things. So kind of an open-ended question with no response goes back to another open-ended question. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Nicholas, thanks for your comment too. Yeah. Yeah, Sylvia, I love the question. If you had the opportunity to speak with the candidate, what 2 or 3 things would you ask him for? Yes. Great. All right. Well, now we will hand it back to Jackie.
Okay. Now, we've talked about this in some ways. Once you get across the moat, now you have the opportunity to enter the castle and get to know more about what's important to the voter. As this flow chart shows, when we switch gears into motivational interviewing mode, we bring our non-judgmental curiosity to the conversation. We try to listen more than we talk. We use open-ended questions, affirmation, and reflections that are all tools for helping elicit something called change talk. The heart of MI is really the skill of listening for and amplifying change talk. Change talk is any expression of reasons to change behaviors or opinions. It may be a comment about what a person did in the past, or how things were better or different, or something about what concerns them now. The goal is to have the person talk about their own motivations for change and help them hear themselves. Here's an example of change talk from Ophelia. I don't really like Trump. And remember in the beginning of our training when we invited you to put things in the chat that might be possible if we had a Democratic supermajority at all levels of government? You wrote things like universal health care and protecting voting rights, gun safety laws, climate crisis mitigation, passing the ERA. All these are topics that could elicit change talk if you explore them further with the voter. But remember, we also said that people feel ambivalent about changes. So what you might hear most when you start a conversation is sustained talk. What is sustained talk? Well, it's what you might guess. It's comments that support the status quo, statements that argue for keeping things the way they've been, kind of the just go along to get along approach. For example, Ophelia says, I don't have time to think about politics. I just try to tune them out. I'm wondering, Elizabeth, could you give us some tips about change and sustained talk?
Yeah, so as Jackie mentioned, change talk is the beating heart of motivational interviewing. But sometimes voters don't serve up their change talk on a platter. They may make negative comments about elections or the state of the country. Charlie Varon, a superstar phone banker, came up with this beautiful observation. We are invited to name the hidden hope, the buried yearning. If you use your curiosity and empathy, you might be able to gather more intel about what they care about. So if somebody says things like, I wish that gas prices weren't so high, or I don't like that we can't afford health insurance, or if I didn't have to work 2 jobs, then maybe I could coach my daughter's soccer team, you've really unearthed some valuable information. It can be tempting to jump right into trying to close the deal, but try to dig deeper, as Bonnie mentioned. Keep using open-ended questions and reflections to elicit more details. Often the voter will share more change talk, helping you understand what they care about and why. Imagine that you're getting paid $1 for every word the voter says. By using open-ended questions and reflections to encourage them to keep talking, you can increase your commission. Once you've uncovered that information, then you can offer strategic tidbits of information that directly relate to their priorities, and then ask them to reflect on what you shared. If someone tells you they work full-time, but they don't know how they'll afford to put their kids through college, you could say, Senator Mark Kelly wants to increase federal funding for college scholarships. What do you think of that? Finally, as the conversation winds down, you can use the ruler to assess how motivated they are to vote or to support your candidate. Then you can make an ask that's tailored to their level of enthusiasm. If somebody says they're a 2, it might not make sense to say, can we count on your vote? But we can help them take the next step by offering to text them the candidate's website. Incremental progress is fantastic, especially with the 34%. You are laying the groundwork for the next conversation they have with a volunteer. Of course, if the voter's more motivated, you could help them make a plan to vote or ask them to vote triple by saying, could you make sure 3 friends or family members vote to re-elect Senator Mark Kelly? And on a positive note, by summarizing any next steps, like I'll text you that information in a minute and thank them for their time. Now, Jackie and I will do another demo, which will illustrate an entire conversation with a voter. Listen for examples of change talk and sustain talk. Pay attention to ways that the volunteer digs deeper to draw out even more change talk. Again, we invite you to drop examples into the chat. You can write change, I wish we had honest leaders, or sustain, I voted before, but nothing changed. We hope this demo will help you to begin to tune your ear to be able to identify change and sustain talk.
Ring, ring.
Hello?
Hi, I'm trying to reach Elizabeth Chur.
Who's calling?
My name is Jackie, and I'm volunteer with the Arizona Democrats. I'm not calling to ask about money. I was just curious to find out.
I'm not interested in politics. I don't vote.
Oh, tell me more about that.
I'm just a college student. I don't consider myself a political person.
You're really focused on school and what the future might look like.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, if you could change 2 or 3 things about the country, what would they be?
I don't know. Everything's going fine for me.
Oh, that's so great. I'm glad things are going well for you. It's good to hear that. So Elizabeth, if you could make things better for some of your friends, what would you change?
Well, some of my friends are dealing with student loan debt. I'm fine. I got some scholarships and I work 30 hours a week to pay the bills.
Wow. Tell me more about how you're managing to pay for school and all your other bills.
I'm just busy all the time. Either I'm in class, I'm doing homework, or I'm working.
Oh gosh. Wow.
It's okay. It's fine. I've been doing that since my first year.
Well, I wonder what your life would be like if you or your friends got more scholarship money.
I guess that wouldn't hurt. I don't really want to have more debt than I'm already going to have. A lot of politicians talk about reducing college costs, but my tuition's gone up every year.
Yeah, no kidding. It's hard to plan your future if you think you're going to have a big bill when you graduate. You know, could I share a bit about Senator Mark Kelly and what he's been proposing for college students?
Yeah, okay, but only one more minute. I'm actually heading to work right now.
Oh, I'll make this quick. As you might have heard, Senator Mark Kelly is the Arizona senator in Washington who's running for re-election in a really tight race this fall. He wants to increase funding for Pell Grants and lower interest rates on federal student loans. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, it could be good if there's more scholarship money available. Yeah. One of my friends is a politics major and she keeps telling me I should vote.
So on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to vote in this election? 0 being no way, and 10 being, all right, I'm ready to vote today. What number would you be?
I don't know, like I guess a 2.
And why is that number not a 0 or a 1?
Well, my friend's really smart and she thinks it's important.
You know, smart people hang out with smart people. What would help you get to a 3 or a 4?
I don't know. I guess if I didn't have to take time off work to go vote.
You know, would you like me to text you a link to request a ballot by mail?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great, I'll do that right now. It's wonderful that you're considering voting in this election, and I really hope that Senator Mark Kelly can earn your vote.
Yeah, I'll think about it. I got to go now.
Oh, thanks for talking. Have a great day. All right. College students, young people, tough conversations. Let's see what you heard in the chat. So, oh gosh, a lot of things you heard. A sustained conversation from Sam saying, I'm not a political person. And Myra also noticed a sustained comment, everything's going fine for me. And then kind of a open-ended reflection, reframing with asking about, well, you know, how's it going for your friends? That's from Emily, which was great.
Yeah, and Rhonda mentioned an example of sustained talk. I'm busy all the time. Yes, try to asking open-ended questions to try to dig deep beneath the apathy. Susan talked about voter would have hung up by now. Yeah, sometimes it's amazing how people can sometimes keep talking if you keep listening. Rochelle, change talk, I guess that wouldn't hurt. Emily mentioned the change talk, the increase in cost, that's an issue that has impacted her life.
And then the change talk, it looks like Rochelle picked up on, well, it could be good if there were more scholarships as a kind of classic change talk item. All right, well, thank you everybody for sharing those observations. I'm going to hand it back to Elizabeth for one last section.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for hanging in there with us and for being on Zoom for almost 3 hours now. We so appreciate your time and participation. And if you can, we invite you to switch to gallery view. I guess we're already in gallery view. Just take a minute to look at this amazing community of people who are working so hard to protect our democracy. In a minute, we're going to start wrapping up the formal part of the training, including one more story I want to share with you. But first, just a few other items. We would love your feedback about today's training, and we're dropping a link for a 2-minute survey into the chat. And we're also dropping a copy of the slide presentation in the chat. As I mentioned in the beginning, today's workshop was the appetizer version of our 2-hour training. We invite you to come to our next full-length workshop on Saturday, April 30th. And we're also dropping a sign-up link for that in the chat. We'll share more tips for connecting with high potential voters, like how to dig up the buried treasure of change talk. We'll learn how to turn lemons into lemonades by converting negative comments into change talk. We'll give you a phrase list with some handy responses to various comments we've heard from high potential voters. And most importantly, we'll also give you a chance to practice these skills in small groups. People often tell us that the opportunity to practice is the most valuable part of the workshop. So we hope you'll join us on April 30th, and please invite your friends. We're truly grateful to the Bay Area Coalition for inviting us today, and want to give a particular shout out to our Zoom hosts, Myra Levy, our slide tech, Sam Chavez, and Judith Bolker of Swing Left Peninsula. So before we close, I'd like to leave you with one last story. In October 2020, I called Dallas for Joanna Katnack, a Democratic candidate for state legislature. I spoke with a 30-year-old named Juan. He told me, oh, I'm not voting. I said, oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. He said he wasn't a political person. He'd never voted and wasn't voting this year either. I tried to stay curious and non-judgmental. This not voting thing is something I only read about in the paper, but here was a live person who could give me more insight into what goes into that decision. I asked whether his friends voted. Some of them did, and they were all over the map from conservative to liberal. They all got along, but they didn't talk much about politics. I asked if he were in charge, what he might change about the country. He said everything was fine. He still had his job and his family and friends hadn't been affected by the pandemic. I said I was glad to hear they were doing okay. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that he wasn't wild about President Trump. My ears perked up. Oh, really? What don't you like about him? I don't like the way he talks about Mexicans. I said, yeah, he said some pretty intense things. You know, it's possible that Texas could flip blue this year. The presidential race is going to be really close, but if Texas went blue, that could decide the whole election. He still wasn't interested in voting, so I asked him, would it be okay to text you information about how to vote by mail? It might give you more options if you decided that you did want to vote. And if you didn't want to vote, you could just throw your ballot away. He said, yeah, I could send him information. I also asked if I could call back in a few weeks just to check in, and he said, sure. I thanked him for his time. We talked for over 20 minutes and said goodbye. I knew it was a long shot, but at least he hadn't hung up on me. On election day, I called him back. He picked up and he totally remembered me. I said, I'm so curious. Did you end up requesting an absentee ballot? And before I could even finish my sentence, he said, I already did it. I voted. I almost fell out of my chair. I was blown away. I said, Juan, when we talked, you weren't interested in voting. What changed? He said, honestly, our conversation got me thinking. I said, oh, what about it? He said, well, the fact that it went on for so long. Other people had called before, but when I told them I wasn't going to vote, they just hung up. You seemed interested in my reasoning without trying to persuade me. You just asked questions and listened. Later, I was frustrated with the crazy things Trump was saying, and I told my friend, come on, let's do this. I said, that's amazing. What would you tell somebody else who had never voted? He said, well, it's easy. It doesn't take a lot of time. I asked if he thought he'd vote again. He said, I guess so. Well, probably. Yeah, definitely, now that I know how it works. I could almost see his thought process evolving as he heard himself speak. This is our future. This is how things are going to change for the better. One voter at a time, one conversation at a time. Right now, we have a precious window of opportunity to up our game when engaging with at least 34% of the electorate, voters like Juan and Ophelia, and the many other high potential voters like them. So many elections are decided by a handful of votes. In this year's midterms, control of state legislatures, 36 governorships, and the US House and Senate hang in the balance, not to mention what's coming up in 2024. We have an incredible chance to boost our turnout levels compared to previous midterms. Until now, we have left a lot of votes on the table. But just think what we could accomplish if we had full participation in our democracy, including many members of the 34%. I invite you to remember the very beginning of this training when you shared such amazing visions of what might be possible if we had democratic supermajorities at all levels of government. Let's work together to get a step closer to making those dreams a reality. Let's reach out to every single eligible voter in this year's elections. Let's engage the power of their hidden hopes to transform our country together. So we're going to close the formal part of this training now. But for those of you who have time to stick around, we'll open it up for a few minutes of Q&A. Thank you all for being so very generous with your time and attention. And thank you for everything you're doing to protect and nurture our democracy. Great. Thank you, everybody. So we'll open it up for Q&A. If you have a question, we invite you to drop it in the chat. You can also raise your hand by going to the reactions tab and clicking raise hand, or by waving your physical hand. And I'll call on folks to speak. If you're calling in on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand in Zoom, and then *6 to unmute yourself when you're called on. Just please let us know if you don't want your question to be included in the video recording. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, Gary, yes.
Hey there. Have my picture on now that I've eaten. Yeah, so the challenge for many campaigns is that the follow-up is not the same person. It's just a random person, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of takes away that personal interaction and relationship with the voter. So in your case, it was a specialized thing where you followed up with that individual voter, like, or was that just a sample?
So I just started keeping a spreadsheet for myself because I was curious of, not every voter, but voters where I had a significant conversation or had some kind of connection, and particularly those that I think were a little kind of on the edge or maybe unlikely. They'd maybe never voted in their whole lives. And I just was curious to see kind of what unfolded. So on election day, I called back probably like 10 or 12 voters to see what happened. And amazingly, many of them did vote, and some of them for the first time. And, I know that that's not kind of normally how phone banks are run. But I think, especially, I would only do that with their permission. I would always ask them if I could call them back. But, sometimes I offer to text them afterwards, and I ask if I can call back. And I feel like if they've given me their permission, then it's all right to reach out to them.
And it's surprising that they said yes to call back, but they, at whatever level, appreciated your conversation, as you found out.
Well, and I think also for me, that's sort of the power of relationship building that, and I think partly how I show respect is to, if I spend 25 minutes listening to someone on the phone, we have a relationship now, and there's an investment there. I'm not just some anonymous person calling them up, but, that there's a connection there, and not everybody's going to say yes, but I actually have to say that there are very few people that I've talked to for that long have said, no, don't ever call me again. That usually happens like in the first minute or two.
Well, I guess we can take the takeaway of this for me is in more localized elections, city council, local elections where you have precinct leaders from the past and now you have other names for these people. If you can create a system where the volunteer really does take responsibility for their neighborhood or precinct or whatever, they can establish those relationships and really change people's minds. So that's where the power really comes in the
Absolutely.
granular sense. Yeah, it's very, very important. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this sort of the person-to-person connections, I really think is democracy at its finest. Kind of in some ways unmediated by like all the TV ads and everything else, but this heart to heart, it is so powerful. And I think that really has the power to transform our country, really. And I think that's part of our work to rebuild and reweave the kind of torn fabric of our community. And for me, it is so much more powerful than these other forces that are trying to tear us apart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Jerry, good to see you again. Do you want to unmute yourself?
There we go. I'm thrilled you remember me, Elizabeth. I called over 2,000 people in the election on the Georgia Senate and was ready to celebrate on January 6th, having won the Georgia Senate race, where I called over 1,000 people. And what did I see but people invading the Capitol? I've never been so shocked in my life. Anyway, I thought you three, Bonnie and Jackie and Elizabeth, that was an awesome presentation, you guys. But having spent 25 years as a sales marketing coach and consultant, I can't say enough for the first 20 seconds of a conversation. It's nanoseconds. And I learned this many years ago when I was first trained in phone banking by some Ma Bell employees. And I marvel that they had this ability to create this instant rapport. It was just phenomenal. So I focused on trying to do that. And I do deep breathing before every call, like 3 really deep breaths, so that the minute that phone goes up, and then I relax my voice and try to engage in some way, sometimes with humor, in the first few nanoseconds. It's so critical. I'd say a minute is a forever. So I can't emphasize that enough. It's so critical. And boy, once you make that connection, they say in sales that people decide within the first 20 seconds if they're going to buy something from you. And there's always the smile in the voice. That's the old tried and true. But
Mm.
those are some of the techniques that I've used, I'd say very successfully. And I just love phone banking, thanks to people like you guys. So I just
you.
make that comment.
Mhm.
Wow. Well, we salute you, Jerry. That's
Yeah.
industrial strength phone banking. And what a huge difference that has made.
Right, right.
And thank you for that reminder about it's not just the first minute, first 10 seconds, probably.
I'm going to work for Stacey Abrams this year. And I'm dying to know who's handling the phone banking for Stacey. I called so many Georgians. I'm from Georgia originally. So I have that little bit of, I don't sound like it, but I was born in Savannah. And that
Wow.
little connection is so critical.
Mhm.
But I don't know who's running the Stacey Bank. If any of you guys do, I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Susan.
Yeah, great presentation. And it got me started thinking of openers or transition questions. If things like, I know we do the, what would you like to change most about the country, or what do you think we should work on? And I started thinking about what if explaining how close we are, or what a fragile majority we have right now. And if we had a stronger majority, if we had 2 more Democrats in the Senate, or had a few more in the House for a safety valve, what do you think they should work on first?
Mm,
Mhm.
And open
Mhm.
it up that way, or by saying, say in Arizona, you know, I'm in touch with Mark Kelly's campaign. What would you like me to tell them? That type of thing. What do you think might open it up a little more to get them talking?
Mhm. Mhm.
those are awesome questions. And I love just sort of kind of offering, like, you have kind of basically a direct pipeline to people that are making decisions, so that they feel like we're not trying to sell them something, we're actually giving them an opportunity to be heard. I think that's very, very powerful.
Thank you.
And I love the way that you frame that too. Like, what if we had a more robust, majority? That's a great comeback to people. Oh, well, Biden's in office. We have the House and the Senate. How come nothing's changing? Well, actually, if we had just a few more votes in the Senate,
How close
you know,
we are. Yeah, that
Mhm.
it's doable.
Mhm.
yes. I think those
And
are awesome.
I would also say what's really nice about what you do is you start out, many of the scripts ask, both canvassing and phone banking ask you to start out with a sort of information, but you do it in a way that's pretty short, and then you hand it back very quickly. You're handing it back to the voter, the person you're talking to, because the power, and I think we heard this both in Bonnie's and David's, the power is about the other person's point of view and their ambivalence. And so what you're describing, and really, I think part of what I'm hearing with Jerry's technique is you're preparing yourself to be able to hear what they're saying. Those deep breaths, calm voice, pleasant voice is like a real invitation to talk to me, tell me, I really am listening. So those are really great concrete tips that feed into the kind of MI type technique.
Great. Any other questions, comments? Well, I know it's just past 1 o'clock and you've already been here for 3 hours. We are so
Mhm.
incredibly grateful for everything you're already doing. And I just feel humbled and honored to be in your presence. So thank you, everybody. I know that
Mhm.
the groups that you signed up through will be reaching out to you for opportunities to put this into practice. And I think really, honestly, for me, it's so much trial and error and getting to
Mhm.
practice. It would be interesting to hear if any of you want to, I don't know,
Mhm.
give us feedback about if you use any of the techniques that you've heard about in this training today.
Mhm.
It'd be really interesting to hear like what that is like when you kind of road test them. I know many of you are using elements of this, but if you try a new technique,
Mhm.
just kind of like, it was interesting to hear from the voters what happened later. I'm always curious to know what comes later in the story. So yeah, please reach out. I'm going to put my email in the chat. And if you want to just let us know anything, I'd be very, very curious to hear, or you can put it in the survey too. Feel free to reach out.
Elizabeth, I've been wondering, it looks like somebody maybe that we should know, or I should know. Who is that photo? Who is that image on your mantle?
Oh, wow. It's actually my mom who
Okay.
left us 6 years ago this month.
Oh, wow.
And I carry her with me. She was not a political activist, but I think I got much of her passion for social justice. And I think it fuels some of my desire to work for a better world. She was really a great example of, I think she was kind of a master gardener of cultivating community. And that is something I feel so privileged to have been able to do through this volunteer work. So I'm grateful to be in your presence.
Amazing.
And when we were first doing this and we didn't think anybody would come, we knew that Elizabeth's mother would be there. So it was we knew we had a great audience, and that was very comforting to me. So yeah. All right.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a good rest of your
everybody.
day and
Yes.
evening for the East Coast people. Take care. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
All right.
Buddy.
Bonnie, great job.
It was so amazing, you guys. I signed up for the long training.
Oh,
I'm
My
in.
gosh. I
in.
want to take yours, Bonnie. Like, wow, I
Yeah,
just was scribbling as
absolutely.
fast as I could.
yeah,
No,
Amazing.
it's
Really
just
great
it's the
stuff.
same principles. It really is.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So
it's
neat,
really-
but I learned different words, which is thankful. I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I felt the
It's
same.
really good. Yeah. Because a lot of times we talk about cognitive dissonance, and I hate that because it's really ambivalence.
Mm.
That's all that
Mhm.
is.
Well, and the way you talk about how to acknowledge without validating, that comes up for us all the time. People say, what happens if somebody starts ranting, or I get a person who's, really borderline theories about conspiracy. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
realize is you can just acknowledge without validating and appreciate them for sharing, and then pivot. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a technique I'm going to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
know,
I do
Jackie-
that, Elizabeth. I take notes and I call back my people.
Oh, wow.
I even have this long-standing relationship with one woman that I call periodically, like every month or so, just to check in to see how she's doing. Just
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
you do become friends.
Hmm.
I mean, after a 20-minute, 30-minute conversation with somebody. Yeah.
Well, and they're like your key informants. They really are. The community, the community advisory board. That's who those callers become for you. So
Yeah.
it's really great.
Bonnie,
Yeah.
I'm curious with all of your experience, and I was intrigued to hear that you do most of your deep canvassing by phone. We get that question a lot. Some people hate phone banking. They love canvassing and hate phone banking, but I'm wondering if you have any tips. I mean, my experience, there's an intimacy in the phone, but it can also be kind of harder because you don't have all the visual cues and the body language. So do you have any tips for how to make that as successful as possible to establish that kind of rapport?
I do listen for audio cues. So if I do hear kids in the background or hear a television show, or to try to build that rapport. It's just I try to match the person's tone. Do you know what I mean? Like if they're very upbeat, I try to be upbeat. If they're kind of slow and talking kind of like this, that's the way I'm going to talk as well, so that I don't overwhelm them with,
Meet
Those
them
are
where they're at.
How do you
in a
get
way.
them to even, Bonnie, how do you get people to even answer the call with caller ID now and stuff, and so many of these things where they make it look like a local number and it's a telemarketer, and so people don't answer.
Yeah, I know. We use Through Talk, which is one of those predictive dialers. I don't know if you, and it's just, you just hope. there's just no real clear way. One tip that somebody shared with me is when you get one of those Google things that says this is Google Voice or whatever, we're checking to see who is this. If you say community representative, you can get through.
Hmm.
I don't know if it works, but somebody said that, and I was going to try it next time I had that opportunity.
Mhm, mhm.
But
Good.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if it was, yeah, Jerry, somebody talked about how, oh, if you're labeling yourself, the maybe people who are ambivalent aren't too sure they want to be talked to by somebody who's got a clear focus. So it's totally honest to say you're with the community or you're with a group doing work. So I think it's really important to be honest, but I think it's okay to not be so detailed right in the beginning.
yeah, I totally agree. I
Mhm,
think it's really important to be honest, right?
mhm,
Because
mhm.
Have you tried where it's identified with some name for the caller ID? Where it's set up to come up with a name rather than just your number.
No.
have
haven't.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, have you tried that?
Oh,
ever?
no, I haven't.
Because some of the systems you can set up to put a name,
Hmm.
and that can be good and bad because then they see the name, they don't want to talk to you. But in some cases, if it's appealing enough, they might more likely answer than just an amorphous phone number.
Okay, we can
Yeah.
try it.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
hate phone banking because so many people don't answer. When I've called in these into your state and others, then you'll get that one or two people that you get them to vote, and it's inspiring, but it takes so many calls.
It's a lot
Yeah.
of calls, especially if you're manually, you're right, with the auto dialers, it's a little
Well, not
easier.
auto
but-
What
dialer
time are
now.
you doing your phone banking, if you don't mind me asking? What's your prime hours?
Oh, here in California? Generally afternoons, 4 to 8.
Okay, yeah. We do 6 to 8:30 or so. So it's about the same. Yeah, it's tough,
Mhm.
but when you do get somebody on the phone and you get a chance to talk to them, that it can make your whole day.
Well, and you think about those races, we met a woman who, in Virginia, where the House of Delegates ended up being completely tied. And they flipped a coin to decide who was going to win that election. And so you realize, like, even one, even two, that's can truly, truly make the difference. So try to hang on to that. Yeah, but it's hard work. It's really hard
Yes.
work. You all are doing it.
While we were on this workshop, I just got a call. I didn't answer it. I think you may have heard my phone ring because I didn't have the ringer off. And then I got a text from this candidate. Sorry, would like to connect with you and whatever. So now I guess they're getting systems where they can send out a text if it's a mobile phone to you. I wanted to write this person back and say, I really don't want to call you back because you didn't bother to call me back twice when I was looking for you to vote a certain way. Ignore the call.
well, maybe not the most positive, open-ended, non-judgmental way, but
Yeah, that's why I'm just not going to
honest.
answer.
It's honest. Yeah.
But your tips, I have a colleague in Sacramento. I work for a state official, and we inherited her because she's a civil servant. She's very good at what she does. She's very loyal, very trustworthy, but so conservative, so Trump-like. And I just have such a hard time. I try just not to even discuss those things, but I'm going to try to incorporate things I've learned from you all today, just to see once in a while if I can break through that. I don't think I'm going to change her mind on a lot, but just to better.
Let us know how it goes. I'm
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll
I've
learn
heard
a
so much
lot.
about non-judgmental, but it is really
Yeah. It's
actually
hard.
doing it is hard.
It's
I
really
was-
hard. But think of it as going to school. She's going to teach you possibly about what is behind her and other thoughtful decision makers. It's a harder with the folks that are really, conspiracy, deep distrust. But I think it's just like talking to the folks for me and my work that don't want to be vaccinated. Initially, all I could do is like hold back, not wanting to yell at them. But really, it's so important to have a sense of where's this coming from? Maybe I won't be able to help you, but maybe you will help me talk to somebody else that's really on the fence. So anyway, go for it, Gary. And yeah, we'd be interested.
Yeah.
Okay.
Iris, I know you guys probably want to go, but I have to share this story. Got a phone call, somebody was dialing for dollars. It was an older man, and he read the script without any expression in his voice. It was all a run-on sentence. And I replied, and he just went right back to the script. He didn't hear anything I said. He didn't acknowledge it. I was thinking, this man needs to go to this class desperately. It was like the opposite of what anybody would want you to do.
Bonnie, I love those videos, those that you showed, kind of, especially with Alan and the before and after. I mean, wow, like I was so curious what kind of instruction, or, I mean, that was just such a radical transformation. Can you tell us more about kind of a little bit behind the scene, behind the curtain of what happened in between those two shoots?
More about that.
He went to a couple of classes and got some coaching on active listening, really active listening, because he wasn't listening before. He really wanted to get his agenda out. Well, I went to college and, he really was, and it wasn't working. And so by filming him and showing him and then teaching him the skill, and helping him practice, that's what made the difference.
And how, I'm wondering how you, what did you say to the voters that they were approaching? We're just filming this for educational purposes, or how did you get permission?
Yeah, just for our own educational purposes, for training, for coaching.
Wow.
And we do that on the phones too. We'll record our conversations, and we tell the folks most of the time people don't care, because they, everything is recorded nowadays. So we just say, we're recording this for internal purposes. And then I keep on talking. I don't give them an opportunity to say yes or no. I just keep on talking.
So that's not a reason for them to hang up?
No, never. But if you ask, it is, right? So I don't really give them an opportunity to say, no, I don't want to be recorded. They can always say that, but I just continue like it's just a little blip on my, in my conversation. Yeah.
We talk about
because so many
opt-out.
people are so used to it.
I would love to get a copy of some of your scripts. I mean, because I think, man, a lot of, the standard issue ones could use a little improvement, and people, I mean, that comes up in every phone bank, and it feels like a little unfortunate that, you have to kind of reinvent the wheel every time sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's ridiculous, which is why I call them from everywhere, and I'm happy to pass them along. And what we do too is, we'll write it, or we'll take the basis of somebody else's, right? And then we rewrite it, and then we'll test it on the phones for about a week and get people's feedback. So did that resonate with voters? Somebody will say, I had a really hard time getting into this section. Okay, let's figure out what we need to do. Because there's all kinds of ways of getting in there, right? And the script is not always perfect.
And
at the time.
With Down Home, are you allowed to endorse specific candidates, or do you have to be nonpartisan?
That's a great question. We are a C3 and a C4, and so we're member led. So we take the candidates that our members have vetted and decided on, and we do endorse them, and then we switch to that like at the end of August. Mid-August or the end of August, we start calling for candidates. There's going to be a big push this year because we have a Senate candidate that's running, Cheryl Beasley. So we're excited about that. Yeah.
Me too.
So that's a definite. And yeah, so we do call for candidates. The canvases I run typically throughout the year are either like we're running one issues based. We're trying to expand Medicaid here in our state. You know, we're one of the last holdouts. And so we're doing that. And then we have one that we're thinking about because of all the stuff that's going on with school boards. We're really getting a little concerned about the right, you know,
Like
we have a
critical
lot,
race theory.
some of
or
our
what-
counties,
Mhm.
yeah. And some of our counties, like in North Carolina, you know, and I'm sure everywhere, but I'll speak for North Carolina. We have a lot of racist groups, the Proud Boys and those others that show up at and have been showing up at our school board meetings and disrupting them and keeping people out. And they're trying to put people on the ballot for school board openings. And we're trying to combat that. Here in the state, we have a statewide strategy
Mhm.
where we're trying to, you know, combat that.
More power to you.
Yeah.
Michael.
So for the 501c3 arm of your work, do you need to remain nonpartisan for that piece of it?
Yeah, we remain nonpartisan until
Mhm.
a
I
certain
see.
point, and then we switch.
And you switch over. So,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious how I actually find the nonpartisan work a little more challenging because I can't necessarily talk directly about what like a candidate's platform. I can talk generally. So I'm just curious, and also like sometimes the voter's going to mention Trump or, something that's clearly partisan just because, he's a public figure. I guess, do you have any tips for if I'm in a nonpartisan, structure, like how you would elicit stuff or how you would talk about things, without naming specific candidates or political parties?
Yeah, we do it all the time. We just talk about politicians in general. So like we did a canvas in the fall where we really were trying to figure out whether or not people thought that the government should and I shared it with you, promote a strong economy and good jobs. And we talked about politicians. Well, what do you think politicians should be doing? So it's more general and we don't talk about specifics. The thing that's good about us is we are not necessarily politically affiliated, right? So we're nonpartisan. We always promote progressive Democratic candidates, but we are nonpartisan. So I can go in saying that, even in an issue-based, we're a nonpartisan community working group, and we're just kind of out here just talking to folks. So it kind of lets the guard down, and they don't start, we kind of try to hedge that off in the beginning. If they do start talking about Trump, all right, I do that pivot thing. I hear you. Yeah. But anyway, so one of the things that really, I don't say, but anyway, but I say, one of the things I really want to get your opinion on is this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Bonnie, I have to say that, I'm an image maker in the world, not just in politics,